It's been claimed that on election day in the US, 280,000 X users closed their accounts. At the same time, Blue Sky saw a massive spike in new users, up from 13 million in October, surpassing 21 million users by November. Rose Wang, who I'm honored to be speaking to today, is quoted as saying that the company's 20-person team has been in firefighting mode as the spectacular growth has far surpassed their projections and has caused some technical stress. Well, we'll cover that in the interview in a minute. Blue Sky is touted as a far more decentralized and democratic digital experience that aims to avoid issues that have dogged many of the other large social media platforms as they scaled and commercialized their business models. Well, we'll find out more about Rose and her team and how they intend to achieve this in the interview. Rose Wang is Chief Operating Officer of Blue Sky Social, a microblogging social media service. It was spun out from Twitter after its acquisition by Elon Musk. Although similar to Twitter in look and feel, Blue Sky Social has ambitions to expand and innovate its platform significantly. Rose was also CEO and co-founder of Chirps, a snack product made from insect protein, with the progressive ambition to reduce land and water usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I may touch on some green issues as well, because of course, social media server farms use a huge amount of energy. It'd be interesting to see what plans Blue Sky has around a green technical future as well. But for now, welcome to the channel. I'm actually delighted to welcome Rose and introduce her to the audience.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Well, let's dive straight into some of the tricky topics. What were the drivers behind the meteoric growth of Blue Sky, especially around the US election? We saw a huge, I would say, defection from X and a huge uptake of Blue Sky.
Yeah, well, the thing I like to help people understand is that actually Blue Sky has been open since February of this year to the public. And while we've seen meteoric rise in the US, UK, and Canada in the last month, we've actually seen significant growth on Blue Sky since we've opened up in February. When we opened up, I believe we had about 1 million Japanese users join on the first couple days. And then it was Brazilian users came on and millions of users, as well as then like people from Korea, Germany, like all over the world. And so I think that's really exciting for us, where we had already seen and been preparing for masses of users to come onto Blue Sky. I think then the question is, well, what's happening now? Like you're right, there was a tipping point in which case many more US users joined post-election. And the way that I like to frame it is that these social spaces online are homes. You have relationships, you have histories of content that you've posted and kind of your own history of timeline, what you're interested in. It really has become a place for people that's more than just a visiting spot or a town square, as people have called it. I really think it's much more than that. And so to say that like one event caused people to leave their homes is probably wrong. What it really feels like is that people have been dissatisfied for a very long time. They don't feel safe online. They don't feel like their posts are being prioritized. They're not really making friends anymore. It really feels like social media is more media than social, where we are promoting the most polarizing posts or the biggest brands, and end users, everyday citizens, no longer have a voice or can really control who they're seeing, whether they're being seen, what content is shown to them. And so Blue Sky, I think, is the reason it's rising now, and why people are not only leaving but staying, is because on Blue Sky people are simply just having a better time. They're not getting dogpiled in their comments, and they're making friends again. And so I do think that it comes down to very simple needs that we're fulfilling. And we can go through all the products, the features and the policies and the culture norms that led to this. But at the end of the day, it's about people having a good time at their home.
And it's interesting you mentioned, so many different sort of nationalities, countries sort of joining. That kind of explodes a bit. The sort of, I know this is a partisan thing, but it explodes the kind of label that this is a leftist sort of exodus from X. It sounds much more like a very diverse community that is growing there, and one which perhaps will have its own bubbles and so on, but it doesn't perhaps suppress those communities or expose them to things they didn't really sign up for. Voices, opinions, or alternative bubbles that don't feel like that homely town square to them.
Yeah, I think this idea of like communities being a bubble or an echo chamber is actually a false or like a wrong way of looking at it. We oftentimes at Blue Sky take inspiration for how do people engage offline and then use it as a metaphor and inspiration for how people work online. And so calling Twitter or Facebook the town square is actually not how town squares worked offline. There was never a global town square where I go and talk about what I think should happen in Greece. I don't live in Greece. And so town squares tended to be local, where you knew your representatives, you understood the local issues that were affected, and it affected you directly. And so I actually think that Blue Sky reflects much more of how communities are formed offline, which is there's like concentric circles of smaller to bigger communities. You have your smaller community of your friends and family to like a larger community of the world that we live in. And people should be able to have the choice of going in and out of those different spaces depending on how they're feeling. And so, I know that for me, when I go to a big party or when I go and interact with a larger group of people, I don't go alone, which is generally how we engage online, right? You onboard, you're kind of tossed into this big party. And then once you're there, usually I like want to find friends that I'm already friends with to get situated and understand what's happening, connect, and then have the abundance to go in and take part in a global conversation. And so Blue Sky gives you that experience with the big world, small world, where any user can create a feed. So what we've had then is 50,000 feeds that range from small communities like, uh, hey, my Moss friends in Oregon, to I really care about what's happening in South Korea right now, right? Where is that breaking news taking place? And so we have these smaller worlds, these smaller communities or feeds that you can hang out in. And then with one swipe, you can go to the global feed of Discover to find out what's happening in the world. And so we think that people should be able to have that choice of what type of community they want to live in at what time, because I differ from minute to minute, let alone, season to season. And so I think we should be able to give people choice to decide for themselves what they want.
And it's an interesting process. I have to admit that I came very late to Twitter. I joined on 24th of February, 2022. And of course, there's no coincidence to that date. So for me, it was a tool to build a community of experts who are very much aligned with an extremely, let's say, political hot potato, which is the war in Ukraine. But interestingly, I saw Jack Dorsey speak, I think, after Twitter was about 9 months old, when almost nobody had heard of it. So there's this lengthy period where I kind of knew the mechanics of it, but hadn't actually used it. What I found, however, and this is why, as a new user of Blue Sky, it's kind of refreshing. I found that my initial presence on X was generating, some traction, some kind of audience and resonance. But as it progressed, after a year and a half, I felt almost as if I was screaming into the void. Now, I know from a technical standpoint, there may well be, this is difficult to prove, some kind of algorithmic suppression. I don't get that sense as a user of Blue Sky. I get the sense that it's almost as if someone has throttled the engine on the car and suddenly released it. So my Blue Sky account is growing. Probably in about 2 months, I'll grow that presence more than I was able to over 3 years on Twitter/X. Now, this is just one person's impression. It's by no means a sort of, scientific data set. But that's the impression I got. And of course, there's been a lot of debate about some form of algorithmic throttling based on political standpoints. Um, I'm assuming that it doesn't form part of Blue Sky's policy, but that's a real risk, isn't it? Where you have these incredibly powerful global platforms.
Absolutely. And I think for the last 10 to 20 years, these platforms have been walled gardens with black box algorithms, where exactly like you said, Jonathan, there's no proof. We're not exactly sure how the algorithm is biasing in one way or another. But what we can say is Blue Sky's offered something as an alternative. In some ways, you kind of have a true test that's happening in the wild, and you are one data point, but we're seeing many more data points around. It's not just number of followers, but it's the quality of those follows. And so, take for example, The Guardian. The first week they were on Blue Sky, they only had 300,000 followers, but they had more engagement and traffic from Blue Sky in their first week than they did all of 2024 on X, where they had 10.8 million followers. Can I say that, with 100% certainty, X's algorithm biases in a way that maybe doesn't benefit The Guardian? Maybe, but I think these proof points where the numbers are such large magnitudes of each other that definitely having an algorithm that has been so warped and we have no idea what's really going into them and who they're prioritizing is affecting everyday users like yourself.
And there are other sort of, I don't know if we could call it algorithmic capture. That's maybe a sort of deeper, sort of longer term process. But there are algorithms, let's say, in YouTube and other platforms that do seem to work, I would say, on a very shallow basis. I say this in the full knowledge that this video is going out on YouTube and, studying those stats. But it really seems to be based on recency. It seems, certainly the YouTube algorithm, I think many of the others are like this, they're based on almost an immediate reaction. So what happens in the first 10, 20, 30 seconds of a piece of material being launched pretty much determines its fate. As somebody trained as a historian, that doesn't seem great to me. That doesn't build long-term connection, and it biases, I would say, against sort of, longer form, deeper, richer content. In some ways, it panders possibly to the worst instincts of humans, which is to go for stuff which is, gossipy, which is scary. It certainly perhaps will bias towards conspiracy theories and breaking news, fear, trauma, rather than other stuff which is perhaps more considered and longer term. I don't know if you share that thought and how Blue Sky is going to be able to evolve, let's say, a more mature behavior to assessing content.
Yeah, well, I think the whole point is that on most other platforms, there's only one game. Right? There's only one way to win. And I think what we're seeing on Blue Sky is that that's not how the world works, where there's only one status game that everyone is playing. And I think that's what has caused so much dissatisfaction, where, for example, Instagram, right? It's like whoever is the most beautiful aesthetic will win the game. And that's not a game that many, many people want to play, nor does it feel authentic. And so we've seen how these incentives have driven society in one direction or another. And then it's caused this feeling of dissatisfaction or dissonance that we can't quite put our fingers on. And so, what I would say that's interesting about Blue Sky is that, like I said before, it's a more democratic system. When we say decentralized, what we mean is there's no central authority making all the decisions or even making their experiences. And so it means if we're making a feed, anyone else can make a feed. If we are making a moderation service that helps label intolerance and misinformation, there's a lot between that and people having a bad time that isn't governed on other networks that we've given the tools to users here to do, whether that's politics or rude posts or speculative information, right? Users have the tools in their own hands to go and label those posts and accounts, and other users can subscribe to that. And so, what I would say at Blue Sky is that there's multiple, many, many different ways to be successful because there's just so many different types of interactions that are happening that are created by different users and developers. And so, the whole point here is you vote with your feet. If you don't like the experience, where we're either enshittifying your feed with a ton of ads, which we have no ads today, I just want to be clear, but like if ever in the future that was the experience, you could just leave. And so that completely changes the incentive of the parent company, our company, to go and make sure that we're actually serving the end user. Because if the end user can leave at any time and we're not giving them what they need, some other developer, some other independent service will.
And this is interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's worth diving into the technical mechanics. We'll get back into disinformation moderation in a minute, because that, of course, I think is something the audience are interested in. But putting my sort of tech head on, when you say leave, they could leave to other platforms, but equally they could leave to other communities that are using your decentralized approach. Producing communities using your template on their own servers, creating their own moderation algorithms. How does this work, sort of technically and in reality? And I'm assuming building a democratic architecture, this is very much a conscious decision baked into your business model.
It is a very conscious decision to build a more democratic system in Bluesky. It's the whole reason we exist, is we've learned that one court system that's run by the same people who are your legislative branch and your executive branch online probably isn't going to serve a global community with very diverse needs. And then not only probably, we've seen that that's true because people are leaving. What I would say about Bluesky is it's very complicated infrastructurally. So the way I like to explain it is much more like, hey, let's just kind of take these global societies or these global worlds that we live in, and how does that work where there's an international like cultural norm, and then once you enter a society, what happens? So let me break it down for you. First, we have essentially, I like to always start with the Bluesky server. It's like you've entered Bluesky, the app. This is what we're all familiar with. And what you've entered is our society, our city. And that society is governed by our Constitution, aka our terms of service and community guidelines. That's where we protect against hate speech, misinformation, intolerance, your usual subject. Then, Aaron Rodricks, our head of trust and safety, who used to run head of election integrity at Twitter, he now enforces and governs this Constitution. However, there are so many things, like I said before, in between these very serious constitutional issues and people having a good time. And that's where we've given the tools to users to build their own court systems, whether that's movie spoilers or speculative information, right, during elections. There's a huge difference between misinformation and speculative information. And so, what we want to make sure is that then people can get their issues adjudicated on these smaller courts where they don't have to wait for the Supreme Court, us, to go and deal with their issues. And so you can work with the owners or the creators of those moderation services and petition them to make changes. So that's a new layering effect of our governance. Then, so that's basically like the Bluesky society. Then you kind of talked about, okay, there are these other servers, these other cities where you don't even actually have to follow our constitution at all. And so that's kind of how the open web works. In the open web, what we believe is freedom of speech fundamentally. But then there's also a social connectivity to it. And so if you are a website that we don't support, or you are an app that is very different from our cultural values, we can actually choose just not to connect with you. Just the way in which Google doesn't index or allow you to search for certain sites that are just not conducive to, what we agree with online. So that's the model in which we believe there should be flexibility, where we err on the side of freedom of speech. We believe that the Bluesky society that we're building up should be governed by our Constitution. If you disagree, go create green sky, yellow sky, and then we'll go decide, depending on your moderation policies, whether we want to connect or not.
That's a great example. I was going to ask that. So, in theory, if this community is created, the separate server-based community that has its own rule structure, you would take all of the sort of Bluesky content, but it'd be filtered through a local set of rules, a local sort of prism. So if someone said, I don't like the color blue, filter everything out that's blue, or I don't like spoilers, as you mentioned there on movies, right? Filter out anything that looks like it might be ruining, the end of a good book, a good movie, etc. But I guess to maybe use a sort of extreme example, you could have, an anarcho-hippie community who wants fewer rules. You could have a community that says, okay, we're going to have Bluesky under Sharia law, and we're going to filter out anything that we class as haram or whatever. I mean, is it this extent of freedom of choice that the platform enables?
So the freedom of choice is is quite open in the sense that so Blue Sky is built on our protocol that's open. And essentially, think about the protocol as like infrastructure or ways for all these different societies to be able to talk to each other. And for it could be like, I'm on Facebook and I'm able to message you on LinkedIn because we're connected through this protocol. That doesn't happen today, right? But we believe that that's the world that should exist. If I'm on Gmail, I should be able to email you on Yahoo. But these are two very different services that maybe have different spam filters, different UI, UX, that appeal to different users. And so that's fundamentally the type of social society we're trying to create is just because you're on Reddit doesn't mean that you can't communicate with me on Blue Sky. We believe that that world should be able to exist. However, we have to make sure that the laws of our two different societies are like compatible. If they're not, we won't trade with you, right? We won't communicate with you, but you can still exist. And so that's the fundamental world we're trying to create is we're building an open infrastructure for communities to go and figure out what their community needs. We have no political viewpoint that we're trying to promote. There's no certain belief system that the team is saying is better one or the other. What we're asking for is healthy dialogue, no matter what those beliefs are. But here are the tools for you to go build the society you want to go make that happen.
And the other bit that I found fascinating, because this has been the promise of web technologies, is liberating people from sort of the constraints of a platform and allowing their content to appear in different media, in different apps, websites, etc. I think you call this the unbundling of content. But again, it's eventually a lot of platforms decide not to do that because they like to own users' attention because attention span is monetized. Again, that will often gravitate towards the lowest common denominator because it translates into money. I think Google's very, very different. That's again an interesting difference in Google results in that you have to have trust and quality to click out to the ads. It's a completely different dynamic. But on social, the longer you've got that eyeball captured, the more money you're going to make out of it. At this point in your business model, you're of course not commercializing through ads. So perhaps you have that sort of freedom to not hype the algorithm to the extent of trying to warp people's perceptions of the world to hold their attention longer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think when we think about ads, we don't go deeper in understanding what is the ad business model. And at the fundamental level, the ad business model is, I want to know, Jonathan, when do you come to Blue Sky? Who do you interact with? What other interests do they have that you have, right? It's about the selling of private data. And so that's why these walled garden platforms like Meta and X are incentivized to keep you locked in and not leave their ecosystem because that's how they make money. The more you generate data for them, the more they can sell to advertisers. So Blue Sky is actually fundamentally different. We took away that option of selling private data away from us from the moment we were created because we didn't want that incentive. So Blue Sky is built off of open public data, much like Reddit. And so the whole point is that we can't own that private data. And if we were to do an advertising model, it would look a lot more like the web where it's intent based. And if you have too many ads, you can just leave and you hate the experience, right? We have to serve you, the end user, who's our primary citizen. And so for Blue Sky, we can then align a lot of our business models, align what we think of success to what the end user sees as success of them having a good time. So for us, it's like, well, what are people with, fewer like 20 followers? What is their experience like? That's the type of metric and experience that internal team is focused on, which fundamentally changes why Blue Sky feels different for users than all the other platforms because they're looking at, well, how is this experience for advertisers?
And let's turn, I'll ask you a bit about tech pressures because this sort of growth that you've seen must create or has created some issues. How's it been running a small team, pre monetization, as it were, to have to scale at this level? and maintain the sort of user experience because it's, you're dealing with vast amounts of data, and users expect things to happen instantly, but at the same time they're crying out for features and functions, and they're like, right, this is a sort of pared down version of Twitter, or go back a couple of years, but I'm missing this and I'm missing that and I'm missing the draft feature and this feature and that feature. Are you having to make some tough choices between sort of scale, growth, maintaining a core user experience, but also this amazing demand for a whole range of new features and functions?
It is pretty wild that we are a 20-person team that has grown to 25 million users and building a protocol. But I also think that it's a misconception that number of people directly correlates with effectiveness. In fact, for engineers, having too many engineers where there's a lot of communication overhead and you need 10 approvals for a feature to be shipped, I would argue is actually much worse and much slower for a company that needs to respond to user needs pretty quickly. Like we need to be nimble. So what I would focus on is one, the quality and the experience of people on the team. How does the team work together? Does the team reflect the global audience that it's hosting? And then the other thing I would think a lot about is essentially how we're leveraging the larger developer ecosystem. And so what's so different about Bluesky is that the comparison I like to make is when we first built the internet. Do you remember AOL? It came, you got a disc in the mail, and you had email. There's all this like boxed in experience. That was the internet for most people for a long time.
You're asking me to sort of reveal my age there, and my
I was there. I was
ancientness. Yeah, yeah.
there.
Yeah, I remember Lycos and Ask Jeeves and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was how the internet was like, that's how we knew the internet. And at the same time, was this open developer ecosystem of the internet we know today that was building RSS feeds, all these blogs, but the mainstream wasn't on there, right? The mainstream was still on AOL. And that's actually similar to how socials developed, which is like, the AOL of today is the Meta and the X, where they're building social in a box and they're saying, we know exactly what you want and you can only have this experience because we are the central authority and governance structure that's going to build this. We're taking the open internet approach where we're saying, okay, we're going to build the protocol, which is basically here's a set of rules for data to be shared to each other. That's all what a protocol is. And then any developer can come in and add to this ecosystem. That's what's so beautiful and flourishing. Like we really believe that innovation, collaboration is what yields the best experiences. It's the wisdom of the crowd. And so with Bluesky, yes, we have a smaller team, but we have focus and we act quickly and we're very experienced. And then we leverage the excitement from the developer ecosystem that's building with us. So, for example, we have this really cool feature called starter packs where anyone can come in and build, here's a set of followers and feeds for you. So when you come into Bluesky, you come into a cozy corner of Bluesky rather than here's a big global town square for you to just jump into. But for the starter packs, we haven't brought the starter packs into search. And a lot of users like, I want to be able to search for starter packs. Now there are many different searchable starter packs that developers have created that are extensions. And so I think that's what we're really excited about is it's not just us, it's actually us and the rest of the world that's building Bluesky. And that's the promise of the social open web that we're building.
I mean, that's fantastic, and I need to start my starter pack because I've had a couple of people really recommend that feature. So that's maybe what I'll do after I've edited this video. But what we've also seen is platforms such as X have, with their size and scale, they've been the target of huge amounts of spam bot activity. So one could argue whether the infrastructure is there or even been dismantled to handle that stuff. That's, a political question. But even if the intention was there, I think it's very difficult to filter out, especially when you have state actors potentially creating multiple platforms, synchronizing their accounts, tying them in with fake accounts, and doing all that kind of stuff. And they're getting cleverer and cleverer at this stuff. How is Blue Sky going to deal with this sort of, intentional malign activity at scale?
Yeah, there are always bad actors in every society. We just have to take that as a given. That said, we got to learn from a lot of Web 2 social. As they were building the plane, they were fighting these problems. We get to learn from what they dealt with. And we also have very experienced folks, like I mentioned, Aaron Rodericks, who've been with Jack as the head of election integrity under Twitter and then co-led trust and safety under Elon. And so we have put in a lot of different technologies just at the outskirts to be able to detect, okay, are there spam bot farms happening in this region? And there's a certain type of pattern of behavior that we're seeing, and we can then nip it in the bud. That said, it is very much a cat and mouse game. So at the end of the day, it's about prioritization. Do we prioritize spam as an issue? And the answer is yes. And so how does this show up? Mark Cuban, for example, on the Wired stage last week, talked about how he posted about the Mavs on Bluesky, and he had 500 comments. And of the 500, only five were troll comments. That's pretty amazing, right? So there's lots of things that can be done on the product side where, one, we're hiding toxic replies under a certain fold in replies. We've enabled third parties to come in, like Block Party used to do for Twitter, where, you can have someone come in and read these toxic comments and then get rid of them for you so that you don't have to see them. And so I think there's a lot of product features that we have built and that we're going to continue to prioritize to ensure that users are having a good time online. But then on the other hand, I think a lot of it is also just user behavior, and giving the tools to users to help us fight spam bots. We call them good bots, bad bots. And so these moderation labels, where any sort of user can go create a moderation label on top of our system. Well, they can go and help us label bad bots. And then over time, we can just take these down. So that's the flexibility of a more democratic system where we don't have to just rely on our workforce, our moderation team to go and catch spam bots, but rather the whole community on Bluesky is motivated to do the same thing. And so we can leverage their help as users are helping label posts and accounts as spam.
And here's a two-part question. This is about AI because there are several aspects to AI which can be challenging for social networks. One, of course, is the ability of generative AI to create masses of content. Now, whether that is directly aimed at being sort of spam content or malicious content, or whether it's just building a presence by creating content that's designed to be compelling, but it's not authentic, it's not human, it's not created by real people, even if it does get some sort of traction. And we know how Google is handling that. I'm fascinated to hear how you will be handling that as well on Blue Sky. The other aspect, of course, is the ability to use AI as part of the moderation process or the architecture of a platform as well. So I'm really interested to hear from you about what the challenges of AI are going to be, the sort of exponential creation of content. And this is not necessarily, the exponentially increasing quality, quite the reverse. How are you going to deal with this?
Yeah, so is the question like whether, so I think it's really important for me to clear up that we are not building generative AI models. So we're not thinking about data in terms of how authentic is it to train our own private models. And so I think the question actually comes in two parts, which is like, okay, how do we ensure that we can reduce misinformation and have more authentic content? And then there's a separate question around what is our stance on generative AI? And so I think these are actually two very separate questions. When it comes to misinformation, this is a huge problem in the world, and there's been lots of tools that have been developed. So first of all, we are very excited about the community notes feature, and that's something that we're going to implement on Blue Sky. And so, wisdom or crowd, let's have people come in and help us understand from experts different viewpoints and context on the information that's being put out there. The other thing that we're really excited about for misinformation, again, is that having to rely on one single moderation team to go label misinformation or not misinformation is really difficult because information comes from all different walks of life, science, right? Uh, During COVID, there was so much misinformation. And will your average Philippine moderator or moderator in India know what to do with that scientific information? No, right? And so then that's why the stackable moderation approach in Bluesky is so interesting because it's about leveraging the expertise of others. So in this world, we have scientists. So we have a science feed, and we've won over a lot of the science community globally. Why? Because we've given them the freedom to curate and moderate their own science feed. There's geophysicists who are the experts who curate the information on geophysics, right? Not the moderators who don't have training on that. And then on top of just in terms of tools and there's different product features that we've developed. At the end of the day, it's still about priority. We are a company run by two women who have grown up on the internet as women, and so we've always just put safety first because we don't believe that people can have fun without safety. So that's in general just the stance that we have at Bluesky. Then there's the question about generative AI. And then when it comes to generative AI, um, like I said before, we are a social company that's focused on building all the services that you need to build cool social apps, whether that's a moderation service, hosting. And so what we hope is that all the future social apps that are going to be built on top of our ecosystem and all connected. So you can go and figure out what are my friends reading? What are they eating? Who are my friends of friends to date? All of that becomes open because you have an open graph of social to kind of think about how interactions online should work in the long term to reflect our offline world. How we're going to prevent what we're trying to do to work with these AI companies who will continue to train off of public data, like they do with Reddit, is we've taken a page out of how websites work, which is any website can be scraped by any developer. That's also true. That's how the open web works. What we do on the web is that we've given developers or the different website creators the option to express consent for scraping. They can say, I don't want my site to be scraped. I do want my site to be scraped. Then it's up to the developers who are scraping to choose to consent or to follow that expression. So we're doing something similar here at Bluesky soon, is that we're going to allow users to express consent over whether they want their data to be trained on or not. It's still up to the AI companies to decide if they're going to follow that. But the good news is for Bluesky, any sort of person who's working on AI, so academics who are working on better moderation models, academics who are working on more pro-social algorithms, the data here is actually really great. It's open and they can use it. For Facebook, for Meta, for X, they are taking your data and training their private models that they're going to profit off of that no one else can profit off of. So fundamentally, it's just a very different model.
It sounds like there's a lot of learnings there from something like Wikipedia, where you have expert moderated content. It also sounds like you're taking a cue from the sort of open markup type protocols that Google uses to try and sort of train its spiders and so on. And of course, we know, as you say, the parts of the web, parts of Google have a better quality experience there. So you consciously try and take the learnings some of the negative learnings from social experience and some of the positive learnings from other environments.
We take inspiration from everywhere that we can because when we think about social media, I think people just think about a place to have fun or to get entertained, but I think that's actually wrong. I think that social media is governance, it's speech. Who gets to be on there? Uh, it affects whole elections. And so if we don't think about online worlds as reflections of our communication structures, then we end up in an offline world that actually looks a lot more like the online world, which is small groups of people deciding what you see, who gets to be there. And so for us, it's fundamentally how do we take inspiration from many democratic systems, even outside of the web, I mentioned a lot of these offline metaphors that we take inspiration from. And so I think that's what makes Blue Sky quite different is that we're not people who believe that technology will solve social problems. We really believe that people and communities will show us the way, and then we just need to go amplify those behaviors that are more pro-social.
I know we're coming to the end. I mean, one of the things I like so far about Blue Sky is that I can put links to videos to other social platforms and know that my post, isn't going to be algorithmically suppressed as a result of that. But are there other features in the pipeline that are going to sort of add to that feeling of a sort of open and highly engaging experience?
Yes, so it's very important for me, and I'm so glad you talked about this, to emphasize how much Blue Sky is encouraging people to post links. Because what we see Blue Sky as is the lobby to the social web. And so you enter Blue Sky, and then here go and discover all the other annexes and other buildings that are built behind the lobby that the links will take you to. And that is what we're seeing is that people are getting much more engagement and traffic. From Blue Sky than any other platform, despite, some sort of vanity metric around number of accounts created, right? It's really about the high quality of the engagement that's happening. What we're excited about too is the more that we're going to build that out. So one of the features we've started to talk about is on Blue Sky, rather than just having a username that you have to go squat, you can use a website URL as your username. Why is that interesting? Well, one, it helps verify that you are actually you. So, like The Guardian can just be theguardian.com, right? No one else but them can do that because they own the domain, they have the DNS record. So here's a way to verify your identity without the central authority verifying your identity. Then we hope that then you can actually click on theguardian.com and it'll open up to a web page. And that's actually the promise that Twitter initially had to publishers is, we're going to help send traffic to whatever blog post, podcast, website, but it never was realized because they actually were trying to keep people locked in. And so we want to realize that vision of, hey, come create your home on Blue Sky where you own the relationship to your audience. You own your content. You own your username. I can't come and change my name to X and swipe away the X handle from you, right? And so that is the world that Blue Sky is building, which is we're giving you as a user, and really think about it as a citizen, we're giving you rights on Blue Sky that you don't actually have anywhere else.
That recalls the Facebook experience where if someone creates a fake profile of you before you've created your own profile, good luck trying to get that banned because you can't prove you are who you are. I mean, it's a bit of a night, a Kafkaesque nightmare.
Exactly, exactly.
Rose, it's been a huge pleasure and a privilege speaking to you. And it's been fantastic to get an insight into a platform that I've, come to start using on a daily basis, and getting a lot more, I would say, engagement out of than on other platforms. So thank you for explaining that. And yeah, good luck with the venture. I think it's a great addition to the social web.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan.